What happens when a bride publicly humiliates her single dad cousin at her own wedding, calling him a failure with crayons in his pocket? And what happens when her own brother stands up and reveals the shocking truth about what this joke of a man actually sacrificed for their family? This is a story about family betrayal, hidden heroism, and the moment when staying silent was no longer an option. Trust me, you need to hear what happened next. The envelope was thick, brown cardstock, gilded letters. Emily was getting married, and I was invited. I stared at that invitation for 3 days straight, sitting on my kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills and Lily's crayon drawings. The paper felt expensive under my fingers, the kind that screams money and exclusivity, the kind that reminds you exactly where you stand in the family hierarchy. My name is Alex. I'm 34 years old and I'm a single dad to the most incredible 4-year-old on the planet, Lily. Most days I feel like I'm drowning. 2 jobs, night shifts, grocery shopping at midnight because that's the only time I can squeeze it in. My alarm goes off at 5:30 every morning and I don't stop moving until Lily's tucked into bed with her stuffed elephant. But here's the thing about family weddings. They have this magical ability to make you feel like you're failing at life even when you're doing everything right. Emily. My cousin Emily. We used to be close when we were kids, building forts in her basement, sharing secrets under blanket tents. But somewhere along the way, life happened. She went to college, got her marketing degree, moved to the city. I stayed home when my ex-girlfriend Sarah got pregnant, stepped up when she decided motherhood wasn't for her. The last time Emily and I really talked was at the family picnic last summer. Lily had drawn this picture of our apartment. You know how kids draw houses, all crooked lines and stick figures. She was so proud of it, ran up to Emily with this huge smile, practically vibrating with excitement. And Emily looked down at this beautiful, innocent drawing and said, quote, "Oh, honey, is this where you live? How quaint." I'll never forget the way Lily's face fell, the way she quietly folded up her drawing and stuffed it in my pocket. 4 years old and she already understood the sting of being looked down on. But family is family, right? That's what my mother Karen kept telling me every time I mentioned maybe skipping this whole circus. Just go, Alex, smile, eat something. It's one night. Emily's your cousin. She's family. Family. That word gets thrown around a lot in our house. Usually right before someone asks me to show up somewhere I don't want to be, to pretend everything's fine when it's not. I spent 2 weeks going back and forth on this decision. Part of me wanted to stay home, order pizza with a Lily, watch Frozen for the 100th time. The other part of me, the part that still remembers what it felt like to belong somewhere, kept whispering that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time they'd see me as more than just the family charity case. So I made a decision. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it with dignity. I pulled out my old suit, the navy blue one I wore to job interviews 3 years ago. It's a little tight around the shoulders. Now the pants are slightly too short, but it's clean, and it's mine. Lily helped me pick out a tie, this bright yellow one with tiny ducks on it that she gave me for Father's Day. "Daddy, you look handsome," she said, straightening my collar with her tiny hands. And you know what? In that moment, I felt handsome. I felt ready. The venue was everything I expected it to be. Private estate restaurant on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where valet parking is mandatory and the water glasses cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Marble floors that clicked under every footstep, crystal chandeliers casting shadows that looked like they were judging you, an air so thick with pretension you could practically taste it. I held Lily's hand a little tighter as we walked through those massive oak doors. She was wearing her best dress, the purple one, with little flowers that she picked out herself. Her hair was in pigtails tied with ribbons that matched her dress perfectly. She looked like a princess, and I was determined that no one was going to make her feel like anything less. The reception area was buzzing with family members I hadn't seen in months, some in years. distant aunts with painted smiles, uncles in expensive suits discussing their latest golf games, cousins comparing vacation photos on their phones. The kind of conversations that happen when people have run out of real things to talk about, but are too polite to admit it. I was scanning the room, looking for familiar faces that might actually be happy to see us when I spotted the seating chart. You know, those big, elegant boards with everyone's names written in calligraphy. Usually, they're placed right by the entrance, so you can find your table number and know exactly where you fit into the evening's social structure. I found our names pretty quickly. Alex, Hunt plus Lily. But then I saw it. Right there in smaller print underneath our names, like a subtitle to a movie you didn't want to watch. Single dad. Not, and guest. Not, +1. Single dad. Like it was my job title. Like it was the only thing about me worth mentioning. I stood there for a moment, staring at those words, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Around me, people were laughing, greeting each other with air kisses, and compliments about each other's outfits. The photographer was snapping candid shots of guests arriving, capturing all these perfect moments of family togetherness. And then I heard it, this low chuckle from behind me. Well, would you look at that? They actually labeled him. I turned around to see Uncle Richard, Emily's dad's brother, standing there with a scotch in his hand and a smirk on his face that I wanted to wipe off with my fist. Richard's one of those guys who thinks his money makes him funnier than he actually is, who's never met a moment he couldn't make more uncomfortable with his commentary. Pretty accurate, though, don't you think? He continued, taking a sip of his drink. I mean, that's what he is, right, single dad? Might as well be honest about it. Lily tugged on my hand. Daddy, what's that man saying? I looked down at my daughter, at her innocent eyes and her perfectly tied ribbons, and I made a choice. Not the choice to leave, though part of me wanted to turn around and walk right back out those doors. Not the choice to confront Richard, though my hands were already clenching into fists. I chose to smile. I chose to pick up my daughter and hold her close. I chose to walk to our table with my head high, even though I could feel Richard's eyes following us across the room. Because here's what I've learned about being a single dad. You don't get the luxury of falling apart in public. You don't get to have bad days when there's a 4-year-old depending on you to keep it together. You learn to swallow your pride, to absorb the hits, to smile when you want to scream. But sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has other plans. Our table was in the back corner naturally. Table 12, the kind of placement that says, we had to invite you, but we don't really want you here. Lily and I settled into our seats, and I watched as the room filled up with the wedding party, extended family, and what I assumed were Emily's college friends and work colleagues. The champagne started flowing almost immediately. Servers in crisp white shirts moved through the room like dancers, topping off glasses, delivering hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per piece than I spend on lunch for a week. The energy in the room was electric, that particular buzz that comes with open bars and people trying to impress each other. Emily was in her element. I have to give her credit, she knew how to work a room. Gliding from table to table in her dress, that probably cost more than my monthly rent, air-kissing distant relatives, posing for photos with anyone who had a camera. She had this laugh, this musical, camera-ready laugh that she deployed at exactly the right moments. It was like watching a performance, and she was the star. Meanwhile, Lily had been directed to what they called the kids' corner, a small table set up near the back of the room with coloring books, crayons, and juice boxes. The other children, there were a mix of ages, some crying, some running around, and a few quietly coloring like my daughter. At 4 years old, Lily was one of the younger kids, but she'd always been mature for her age. She sat there with her purple crayon, carefully filling in the petals of a flower, completely absorbed in her work. I kept glancing over at her, making sure she was okay, making sure she felt included even though we'd been literally placed at the children's table. Every few minutes she'd look up at me and wave, and I'd wave back, giving her my biggest smile. But inside, I was already counting down the minutes until we could politely excuse ourselves and go home. The first speech came during the salad course. Emily's maid of honor, a perfectly put-together woman named Jessica, who I'd never met, stood up with her champagne flute and delivered a toast that was equal parts sweet and slightly condescending. She talked about Emily's journey to find the one, her career success, her ability to have it all. Standard wedding fare, nothing too offensive. But then it was Emily's turn to speak. She stood up at the head table, radiant in her wedding gown, her new husband beaming beside her. The room fell silent except for the gentle clinking of silverware against plates as people finished their salads. She raised her glass, and I could see that mischievous glint in her eye that I remembered from our childhood. The one that usually meant someone was about to get hurt. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "It means the world to David and me to be surrounded by the people we love most. So far, so good. Standard opening. You know, planning a wedding really makes you think about what's important in life. About making good choices, about the kind of person you want to be and the kind of person you want to spend your life with." She paused, taking a sip of champagne, and I swear I could feel the temperature in the room shift slightly. It's so important to surround yourself with positive energy, with people who lift you up instead of bringing their baggage everywhere they go. Even to weddings. A few people laughed. Nervous laughter, the kind that happens when people aren't sure if they should be laughing, but feel like they need to react to something. I mean, some people just can't seem to leave their problems at home. You know, they bring their drama, their poor life choices, their complications everywhere they go. Even to celebrations that are supposed to be about joy and new beginnings. More laughter, now louder and more confident. I could feel eyes starting to turn in my direction, and my face was getting hot. Lily looked up from her coloring, sensing the change in the room's energy, even if she couldn't understand what was happening. Emily wasn't done. But tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about love, real love, the kind of love that comes from making smart decisions, from choosing stability over chaos, from building something lasting, instead of just surviving. The word surviving hit like a slap. I gripped my fork a little tighter and tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside something was cracking. And then Uncle Richard, never one to miss an opportunity to pile on, raised his own glass from across the room. "Here's to Emily and David," he called out, his voice slightly slurred from the open bar. "And here's to not settling for damaged goods. Can't resell a dented truck, am I right?" The laughter that followed that comment was ugly, sharp, and cruel, and directed. I felt it like a physical blow, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Lily had stopped coloring entirely now. She was looking at me with those big, concerned eyes that children get when they know something's wrong, but don't understand what. I forced another smile and gave her a thumbs up, but I could see she wasn't convinced. That's when Aunt Sophia leaned over from the table next to ours. Sophia's always been the family peacekeeper, the one who tries to smooth over awkward moments and pretend everything's fine when it clearly isn't. "Don't take it personal, honey," she whispered, patting my arm. "Emily just likes to be the center of attention. You know how she gets." But here's the thing about being publicly humiliated. It doesn't matter if someone tells you not to take it personally. It doesn't matter if they try to excuse it or explain it away. The damage is already done. The words are already out there, hanging in the air for everyone to hear and remember. I nodded at Sophia and managed to whisper back, "I know. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. I looked around the room and saw the faces of my family members. Some were laughing along with Emily's speech. Others looked uncomfortable, but weren't saying anything. A few were actively avoiding eye contact with me, suddenly very interested in their dinner plates or the floral centerpieces. This is what it feels like to be alone in a room full of people who are supposed to love you. This is what it feels like to realize that family isn't always about blood, and blood isn't always about family. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. Get through tonight. That became my mantra. 4 words on repeat in my head like a meditation. Breathe. Just breathe. Get through tonight. Don't make a scene. Don't give them more ammunition. Don't let Lily see you break. I glanced over at her again. She'd gone back to her coloring, but I could tell she was listening to everything. Kids always are. They pick up on tension and emotions even when adults think they're being subtle. I made a mental note to have a conversation with her later about what she'd heard to make sure she understood that none of this was about her. But then something interesting happened. I caught sight of someone at the head table who wasn't laughing. Marcus, Emily's older brother, was sitting there with this expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't amusement or agreement with his sister's speech. It was something else entirely. Conflict. That's what it was. He looked conflicted. Marcus was watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Not in a bad way exactly, but like he was trying to communicate something across the room that he couldn't say out loud. Like he knew something the rest of the room didn't. We'd always gotten along okay, Marcus and I. He was a few years older, had gone to college for computer science, worked in tech now. Quiet guy, thoughtful, not given to the kind of performative cruelty that seemed to run in the rest of the family. But we'd never been particularly close either. So why was he looking at me like that? Emily finished her toast with a flourish, something about love conquering all and choosing happiness over hardship. The room erupted in applause, and cheers, glasses clinked, and conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been eviscerated in front of 50 people for the crime of being a single father. I took a long sip of water and tried to center myself. Breathe. Just breathe. Get through tonight. But Marcus was still looking at me, and something in his expression told me that this night was far from over. To understand why Marcus was looking at me like that, I need to take you back 2 years. Back to a time when I thought I knew what rock bottom looked like before I learned that life always has a few more levels to dig. It was March of 2022. Lily had just turned 2, and I was working at the warehouse during the day and doing freelance graphic design at night. Money was tight, but we were managing. I had a routine, a system, a way of making it all work even when it felt impossible. That's when I got the call from Marcus. I remember exactly where I was when my phone rang. Sitting at my kitchen table at 11 p.m., laptop open, working on a logo design for a local restaurant while Lily slept in the next room. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. Alex. The voice was shaky, unfamiliar. It's Marcus, Emily's brother. I hadn't talked to Marcus in probably 6 months. We'd see each other at family gatherings, exchange pleasantries, but we weren't close. So hearing his voice at 11 o'clock at night was strange enough. Hearing how broken he sounded was alarming. Marcus! What's wrong? I got fired today. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them in for hours, and finally couldn't contain them anymore. They laid off half the development team. Budget cuts. I've been there 3 years, Alex. 3 years, and they just let me go like I was nothing. Marcus had been working at a tech startup downtown. Good job, good salary, the kind of position that came with benefits and a 401k and all the things that spelled stability. Losing it wasn't just a financial blow. It was an identity crisis. I'm sorry, man. That's terrible. Are you okay? Do you need anything? There was a long pause, and I could hear him trying not to cry. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got rent, car payments, student loans. I've been calling everyone I know, sending out resumes, but nobody's hiring right now. The market's terrible. I looked around my tiny apartment at the stack of bills on my counter at the freelance work I still needed to finish before morning. I was barely keeping my own head above water. But something in Marcus's voice reminded me of myself 2 years earlier when Sarah left, and I was suddenly responsible for everything. Listen, I said, I might be able to help. I do freelance design work. It's not much, but I could throw some projects your way. Help you keep some money coming in while you look for something permanent. Alex, I can't ask you to do that. I know you've got your own stuff going on. You're not asking, I'm offering. And that's how it started. Over the next 6 months, I gave Marcus every freelance gig I could spare. Website designs, logo work, business cards, marketing materials, stuff I would have done myself and kept the money. But instead, I passed it along to him. He was good at it too, better than I expected. Had an eye for clean modern design that clients loved. But the freelance work was just the beginning. Marcus's unemployment stretched on longer than either of us expected. Turns out the tech job market in our area had taken a nosedive and companies were hiring freeze after hiring freeze. He started getting desperate, applying for jobs way below his skill level, just trying to find something, anything, to pay the bills. That's when I stepped in with the resume. I'd been updating my own resume for years, learning what worked and what didn't, figuring out how to present my scattered work history in a way that looked intentional instead of chaotic. So, one night I sat down with Marcus at a coffee shop and completely rewrote his resume from scratch. You're not just a software developer, I told him, pointing at his laptop screen. You're a full stack developer with experience in agile methodologies and cross-functional team collaboration. You don't just write code, you solve business problems through technology. We spent 3 hours that night transforming his work experience from a list of tasks into a narrative of achievement. I taught him how to quantify his accomplishments, how to use action verbs, how to make himself sound indispensable instead of replaceable. Then came the interview prep. Marcus hadn't interviewed for a job in 3 years. He was rusty nervous, second-guessing himself constantly. So, every weekend for a month, I'd come over to his apartment with a list of common interview questions, and we'd practice. Tell me about yourself. What's your greatest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I played the role of the interviewer, giving him feedback on his body language, helping him craft answers that were honest but strategic. We did mock interviews until he could answer those questions in his sleep. But here's what really gets me looking back on it now. During all of this, while I was spending my weekends helping Marcus instead of with Lily, while I was giving away freelance work that could have paid for groceries or diapers, while I was investing hours and energy I didn't have in someone else's crisis. Where was the rest of the family? Emily was posting Instagram photos from her weekend trips to wine country. Uncle Richard was complaining at family dinners about how kids these days don't want to work hard. And when Marcus tried to reach out to them for support, for advice, for just someone to listen, you know what? He got. Emily told him he was being lazy, said he needed to stop feeling sorry for himself and just get a job. Any job. She actually said to him, I don't understand why you're being so picky. Plenty of people work at McDonald's. Uncle Richard's advice was even worse. You need to man up, Marcus. Stop wallowing and start hustling. Nobody owes you anything. Man up, as if losing your job was a character flaw instead of an economic reality, as if being scared about your future was weakness instead of human nature. So Marcus stopped calling them, stopped asking for help, stopped expecting his own family to show up for him when he needed them most. But I kept showing up. When he finally landed an interview at a software company 40 minutes away, I drove him there because his car was in the shop and he couldn't afford the repair. When he got the job and they wanted him to start immediately, but his apartment lease wasn't up for another month, I helped him move. When his sister needed emergency surgery, and Marcus had to watch her 8-year-old daughter for a week, but he was still in his probationary period at the new job and couldn't take time off, I took vacation days from the warehouse and watched her myself. A week. I watched an 8-year-old girl I barely knew for a week while working nights and taking care of Lily during the day, because Marcus needed help and no one else in the family would step up. Do you know what it's like to juggle a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old when you're already running on 3 hours of sleep? Do you know what it's like to explain to your own daughter why another little girl is sleeping in her room, eating at her table, playing with her toys? But I did it. Because that's what you do for family. That's what you do when someone is drowning and you have a life preserver. Now, sitting in this wedding reception, watching my family laugh at jokes about my life falling apart, I could see Marcus remembering all of this too. I could see him looking around the room at these people who had abandoned him when he needed them most, who were now applauding Emily's speech about making good choices and avoiding people with baggage. The irony was suffocating. These people laughing at the single dad struggling to make ends meet had no idea that the same single dad had been the only thing standing between Marcus and complete financial ruin. They had no idea that while they were posting inspirational quotes on social media about family loyalty, I was actually living it. I reached under the table and took Lily's hand. She was still coloring, but I could tell she was listening to the adult conversations swirling around her. I squeezed her fingers gently and she looked up at me with those trusting eyes. In that moment, sitting there surrounded by people who saw me as a failure, I had a moment of perfect clarity. You're not the joke, I thought. They are. Every single person in this room who had laughed at Emily's speech, who had raised their glass to Uncle Richard's cruel comment, who had looked at me with pity or disdain or embarrassment, they were the joke. They were the people who talked about family values but couldn't be bothered to help when family needed them. They were the people who measured worth by bank account balances and relationship status instead of character and kindness. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. I was angry, but it was a quiet anger, a controlled anger. The kind of anger that doesn't explode outward, but burns steady and clean inside your chest. The kind of anger that gives you strength instead of making you stupid. That's when I noticed Marcus pulling out his phone. He was being subtle about it, keeping the device low and angled away from the rest of the head table. His thumbs moved quickly across the screen, typing something with the kind of focused intensity that suggested this wasn't a casual text message. Whatever he was writing, whoever he was writing to, I could tell it was important. I could see the muscles in his jaw working, the way his shoulders had straightened, the way his whole posture had changed from conflicted observer to man with a mission. The energy in the room was starting to shift too, though I don't think most people noticed it yet. Conversations were getting a little louder, people were drinking a little faster, and there was this electric feeling in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm, when all the hair on your arm stands up. Marcus finished his text and put his phone away. Then, he looked directly at me across the room, and this time, there was no conflict in his expression. This time, there was resolve. Something was about to happen. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air pressure seemed to change, in the way Marcus was now sitting forward in his chair, like a runner getting ready to sprint. I squeezed Lily's hand a little tighter and prepared for whatever was coming next. Dinner service was winding down. The servers had cleared the main course plates, and the wedding cake had been cut with the requisite photos and applause. People were settling into that comfortable post-meal lull loosened by wine and good food, the kind of relaxed atmosphere where guards come down and people say things they might not say when they're completely sober. I thought we were in the clear. I thought maybe Emily had gotten her shots in during the toast and would leave it at that. Maybe we could finish dessert, sit through the dancing, and slip out early without any more drama. I should have known better. Emily loves an audience, and she had a captive one. 50-plus family members and friends, all slightly drunk and in a good mood, all hanging on her every word, because it was her special day. The photographer was still circulating, capturing candid moments, and I could see Emily's eyes tracking his movement around the room like she was choreographing her next scene. She stood up again, tapping her champagne flute with a knife. The delicate ding-ding-ding sound cut through the conversations and laughter, drawing everyone's attention back to the head table. Sorry, everyone, I know I already spoke earlier, but I just have one more little thing I wanted to share. Her voice was silky, smooth, practiced. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. She'd been waiting all evening for this moment, saving it for when people were relaxed and vulnerable and wouldn't see it coming. I was just sitting here looking around this beautiful room, at all of you wonderful people, and I got so overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude for having such an amazing support system, such a strong family foundation. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room, making sure she had everyone's full attention. David and I, We're so blessed to be starting our marriage surrounded by people who understand what real commitment looks like. People who know that love isn't just about feelings, it's about choices. Smart choices. Here we go, I thought. Here comes round two. Marriage is about choosing wisely. It's about finding someone who's going to be your partner, not your project. Someone who's going to add to your life, not complicate it. She was looking directly at me now, no longer pretending this was general marriage advice. It's about not ending up alone at 34 with crayons in your pocket. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the laughter started. But this laughter was different from before. This wasn't nervous chuckling or polite amusement. This was sharp, cruel, delighted laughter. The kind of laughter that happens when people realize they're being given permission to be their worst selves. Uncle Richard practically spit out his wine. Crayons in your pocket. That's perfect. Several of Emily's college friends started giggling behind their hands, stealing glances in my direction. I could see phones being subtly pulled out, and I realized with horror that some of them were probably recording this. This moment of my humiliation was going to live forever on someone's social media. Lily looked up from her coloring book, confused by the sudden burst of laughter. Her little face was a mix of curiosity and concern, like she could sense that something bad was happening but couldn't understand what. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging on my sleeve. "Why is everyone laughing?" I couldn't answer her. I literally couldn't speak. My throat had closed up completely and my hands were shaking. I gripped my water glass so tightly I was afraid it might shatter. Around the room, I could see the faces of my family members. My mother, Karen, was staring down at her dessert plate like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen, actively avoiding eye contact with me. Aunt Sophia had her hand over her mouth, but I could see her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. Cousin David was openly laughing, slapping his knee like Emily had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Even some of the older relatives, people I'd respected my whole life, were smiling and nodding along. This was my family. These were the people who had held me as a baby, who had given me birthday presents and Christmas gifts, who had told me they loved me at family gatherings my entire life. And they were laughing at me being publicly destroyed by a woman who couldn't be bothered to show basic human decency. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to sink through the floor and disappear forever. I wanted to grab Lily and run out of that room and never see any of these people again. But I also wanted to explode. I wanted to stand up and scream at all of them, to tell them exactly what I thought of their cruelty, to make them feel as small and worthless as they were making me feel. I wanted to vanish, or explode, or both. Instead, I sat there frozen, holding my daughter's hand under the table, feeling like my entire world was collapsing in slow motion. That's when Marcus moved. I saw him first in my peripheral vision, pushing his chair back from the head table with more force than necessary. The sound of wood scraping against marble was loud enough to cut through the laughter, and conversation started to die down as people noticed him standing up. Marcus is tall, probably 6'2", and when he stands up with purpose, people notice. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing along with his sister's joke. His face was set in an expression I'd never seen before, something cold and determined that made the air in the room feel suddenly electric. He started walking toward my table, not rushing, not storming, just walking with steady, deliberate steps that seemed to echo off the marble floors, even though the room was carpeted. With each step he took, the laughter died down a little more. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People started turning in their chairs to watch him move across the room. Emily's smile faltered. She was still holding her champagne flute, still standing at the head table, but now she looked confused. This wasn't part of her script. Marcus was supposed to laugh along with everyone else, not whatever this was. "Marcus!" she called out, but her voice didn't have that confident, camera-ready quality anymore. She sounded uncertain, almost nervous. He didn't respond, just kept walking. By the time he was halfway across the room, the silence was complete. Absolute. The kind of silence that makes you aware of sounds you never usually notice. The hum of the air conditioning. The distant clatter of dishes being washed in the kitchen. The soft jazz music that had been playing in the background all evening. You could hear people breathing. Marcus reached my table and stopped. He was standing right beside my chair, close enough that I could smell his cologne, close enough that I could see the muscle twitching in his jaw. He looked down at me for a moment, and his expression softened just slightly. Then he turned to face the room. 50+ people were staring at him in complete silence, waiting to see what he was going to do. Emily was still standing at the head table, her champagne flute now lowered to her side, her face pale under her carefully applied makeup. Marcus cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear, and carried easily across the silent room. "I think it's time you all heard what Alex really did." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a promise, like the first rumble of thunder before a storm breaks. Emily's face went from pale to white. Uncle Richard's smug expression faltered. My mother finally looked up from her dessert plate, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear. And in that moment, sitting there with my daughter's hand in mine, I realized that everything was about to change. Marcus took a breath and looked around the room, making eye contact with different family members, before he spoke again. When he did, his voice was steady and clear, the voice of someone who had made a decision and wasn't going to be talked out of it. "You laughed at the wrong person." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. 2 years ago, when I lost my job and thought my life was over, when I was calling everyone in this room, begging for help, for advice, for just someone to listen to me, most of you told me to figure it out myself. Some of you told me to man up. Some of you told me I was being lazy. His eyes found Uncle Richard, who was suddenly very interested in his wine glass. "But this man, this joke of a single dad that you're all laughing at, he didn't just listen. He didn't just offer empty words of encouragement. He gave me freelance work when I was broke. He rewrote my resume when I couldn't get an interview. He drove me to job interviews when my car broke down. He watched my niece for a week when my sister needed surgery and I couldn't take time off work." I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The smug expressions were fading, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like shame. When I was falling apart, this man, this single father who was already working 2 jobs and raising a 4-year-old by himself, somehow found time to hold my life together. He gave me money he didn't have time he couldn't spare, and support that none of you bothered to offer. Emily was still standing at the head table, but her champagne flute was shaking in her hand. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished." The authority in his voice was absolute. This wasn't the quiet, thoughtful Marcus I knew from family gatherings. This was someone who had found his backbone and wasn't afraid to use it. "You want to talk about love. You want to talk about commitment. You want to talk about what makes a good man." He turned back toward me and his voice softened just slightly. "Alex gets up every morning at 5:30. He makes breakfast for his daughter, gets her dressed, drops her off at daycare, works an 8-hour shift at the warehouse, picks her up, helps her with her homework, makes dinner, gives her a bath, reads her stories, and puts her to bed. Then he stays up until midnight doing freelance design work to pay the bills." The room was dead silent. I could see people doing the math in their heads, realizing what Marcus was describing wasn't just a job, it was a life of complete self-sacrifice. He does this 7 days a week, every week, for 4 years. He's never missed a parent-teacher conference, never forgotten a doctor's appointment, never left her with a babysitter so he could go out and party. His entire existence revolves around making sure that little girl feels loved and safe and valued. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break exactly, but crack open in a way that let light in. For 2 years, I'd been carrying the weight of feeling like I was failing, like I wasn't doing enough, like I was somehow less than other people, because my life looked different from theirs. But hearing Marcus describe my daily reality, hearing him say it out loud with such respect and admiration, I realized something. I wasn't failing. I was succeeding in ways that most people couldn't even comprehend. "You worship weddings," Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger. You celebrate marriage like it's the ultimate achievement. But you mock the man who's been doing the real work of love every single day for 4 years. You mock someone who raises a child alone, who sacrifices everything for someone else's happiness, who shows up every day, even when it's hard. Emily finally found her voice. Marcus, you're being dramatic. It was just a joke. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what? Marcus interrupted, and his voice had an edge to it now. You didn't mean to humiliate him in front of 50 people. You didn't mean to make fun of a single father struggling to provide for his child. You didn't mean to mock someone who's shown more integrity and love than most married couples ever will. You're being emotional, Uncle Richard muttered from his table, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus turned to face him directly. No, Richard, I'm being honest. There's a difference. He looked back at Emily, and his expression was a mixture of disappointment and disgust. You mocked a man who gave more love in 1 week of helping me than most husbands give their wives in a year. You made jokes about someone who's been living the values you only pretend to care about. Around the room, I could see the impact of Marcus's words sinking in. Some people looked ashamed. Others looked angry, but not at me anymore, at themselves. A few were crying. My mother, Karen, was one of them. She was sitting at her table with tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of sympathy or sadness. These were tears of guilt. She was remembering all the times she'd pressured me to come to family events where I'd be made to feel small. All the times she'd suggested I should try harder to fit in, to make things work, to just smile and get along. She was realizing that she'd been asking me to tolerate abuse for the sake of keeping the peace. That's when I stood up. I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. I just found myself rising from my chair slowly, deliberately, like I was moving through the water. The room's attention shifted to me, but I didn't look at any of them. I walked over to where Lily was sitting at the kids' table, still clutching her purple crayon, still watching everything with those wide, understanding eyes. Ready to go home, sweetheart? I asked quietly. She nodded and started packing up her crayons without being asked. Smart kid. She knew when it was time to leave. I helped her down from her chair and took her small hand in mine. Then I turned back toward the room full of family members who were all staring at us. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Marcus had said everything that needed to be said. But as I started walking toward the exit, Marcus spoke one more time. His voice was quieter now, but in the absolute silence of the room, every word carried. Emily, you don't get to humiliate someone and then act surprised when truth walks in. He paused, letting that sink in. You spent all evening talking about making good choices, about choosing wisely, about building something lasting. But you chose cruelty over kindness. You chose mockery over support. You chose to tear down the one person in this room who's actually been living the values you claim to celebrate. Emily was crying now, but not the pretty camera-ready tears of a bride overwhelmed by emotion. These were ugly tears, the kind that come with the realization that you've revealed yourself to be someone you don't want to be. The joke wasn't on Alex tonight, Marcus continued. It was on all of us, because we let this happen. We sat here and laughed while you destroyed a good man for the crime of loving his daughter more than he loves his own comfort. I reached the exit and paused for just a moment, not to look back, but to let Lily adjust her grip on my hand. She looked up at me with complete trust, complete faith that whatever was happening, Daddy would take care of everything. And you know what? She was right. As we walked out into the cool night air, leaving behind the marble floors and crystal chandeliers and all the people who thought love could be measured by wedding invitations and seating charts, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. The parking lot was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos we just left behind. The valet attendants were lounging by their podium, probably wondering why guests were leaving so early from what was supposed to be the social event of the season. I handed over my ticket and waited for them to bring around my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one with the car seat in the back and the stack of Lily's coloring books on the dashboard. Lily was swinging my hand as we stood there, completely oblivious to the magnitude of what had just happened. To her, we'd simply attended a boring grown-up party, and now we were leaving. The way kids process trauma is both heartbreaking and beautiful. They absorb the emotions without understanding the context, taking their cues from the adults around them about whether they should be worried or not. "Daddy," she said, looking up at me with those big brown eyes that could melt glaciers. "Can we go to the park after this?" The park. Of course she wanted to go to the park. It was Saturday evening, still light outside, and to a 4-year-old leaving a party early meant more time for fun. I looked down at her in her purple dress, with the flower pattern, her hair still perfect in its pigtails despite the evening's events, and I couldn't help but smile. "You bet, sweetheart," and I meant it. We were going to go to the park. We were going to push her on the swings until she squealed with laughter. We were going to slide down the big slide together, me holding her on my lap because she was still a little scared to go by herself. We were going to collect interesting rocks and maybe feed the ducks if we had any crackers left over from lunch. We were going to do all the things that mattered, all the things that made life worth living, all the things that Emily and her crowd would never understand. That's when I heard footsteps behind us. I turned to see Marcus walking out of the venue, his bow tie loosened, his formal jacket slung over his arm. He looked like a man who had just lifted a tremendous weight off his shoulders. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other across the parking lot. There was so much to say and absolutely nothing that needed to be said. He had done something tonight that changed everything. Not just for me, but for himself too. He had chosen truth over comfort, courage over convenience. As he got closer, I could see that his eyes were slightly red, like he'd been crying. But he was smiling too, the kind of smile that comes after you've done something you're proud of, something that required real bravery. He didn't extend his hand for a handshake. He didn't go in for a hug. He just nodded at me, a simple, respectful acknowledgement between two men who understood each other completely. I nodded back. It was a pact, a silent agreement. An understanding that some things are more important than family politics, that some battles are worth fighting even when the cost is high, that some truths need to be spoken even when they're uncomfortable. The valet brought my car around and I helped Lily into her car seat, making sure the straps were tight and her stuffed elephant was within reach. Through the windshield, I could see the warm glow of the reception venue, could hear the distant sound of music starting up as the DJ began the dancing portion of the evening. Inside, Emily was probably trying to salvage her perfect wedding, telling people that Marcus was just stressed from work or going through a difficult time. She was probably laughing it off, making jokes about family drama, pretending that nothing had changed. But something had changed. Everything had changed. As I drove away, Lily chattering in the back seat about which swing she wanted to use at the park, I realized something profound. I didn't need applause. I didn't need apologies. I didn't even need acknowledgement. I just needed someone to speak the truth, and someone did. For 4 years, I'd been carrying around this secret shame, this feeling that I was somehow less than, somehow broken, somehow not quite measuring up to everyone else's standards. I'd internalized their judgment, made their opinions of my life more important than my own understanding of what I was accomplishing every single day. But Marcus had held up a mirror to that room tonight, and he'd forced them to see what I really was. Not a failure, not a joke, not someone to be pitied or mocked. A hero. Not the kind of hero who wears a cape or saves the world, the kind of hero who gets up every morning and chooses love over convenience, responsibility, over freedom, sacrifice, over self-interest. The kind of hero who carries crayons in his pocket because his daughter might want to draw something beautiful. The kind of hero who pays bills late sometimes because groceries are more important than credit scores. Not all heroes wear tuxedos to fancy weddings. Some of them wear 10-year-old suits and ties picked out by 4-year-olds. Some of them carry diaper bags instead of briefcases, drive minivans instead of sports cars, measure their success in bedtime stories, raid and scraped knees kissed better instead of promotions earned and networking events attended. We went to the park that night. Lily wore her fancy dress on the swings and got grass stains on her white tights from rolling down the hill. She collected 17 rocks of various shapes and sizes, each one a treasure that needed to be explained in detail, and added to the collection on her bedroom windowsill. When we got home, I helped her out of her party dress and into her favorite pajamas, the ones with the unicorns on them. While I was making her a snack, she sat at the kitchen table with her crayons and started drawing. "What are you making, baby?" I asked, setting down her apple slices and string cheese. "It's us, Daddy." She held up the paper proudly. It was a rocket ship drawn in her careful 4-year-old handwriting with labels that said, "Me plus Dad," inside a red heart. At the bottom of the page, she'd written, "Going to space," in letters that wandered all over the place. "Where are we going in our rocket ship?" I asked, sitting down beside her. "Everywhere," she said matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "We can go anywhere we want because we're brave," out of the mouths of babes. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat on my couch in my small apartment and thought about everything that had happened. I thought about Emily's cruel words and Uncle Richard's laughter. I thought about my mother's tears and the shame on so many faces as Marcus spoke his truth. But mostly, I thought about the future. I thought about all the family gatherings I wouldn't attend, all the obligations. I wouldn't feel guilty about skipping all the energy I could redirect toward the people who actually mattered. I thought about the boundaries I would set and the standards I would refuse to lower. I thought about the story I wanted Lily to grow up knowing about herself, not the story where she was the charity case or the punchline or the burden. The story where she was the rocket ship capable of going anywhere strong enough to reach for the stars. Here's what I want you to know if you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life in mine. If you've ever been the punchline at a family gathering, if you've ever been made to feel small for doing something difficult and important, if you've ever walked out instead of staying small, if you've ever chosen dignity over keeping the peace, this story is yours too. Your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to recognize it. Your success isn't measured by other people's standards. Your love isn't diminished by other people's inability to understand it. You don't owe anyone an explanation for the life you've built. You don't owe anyone an apology for surviving. You don't owe anyone access to your joy, your peace, or your children's innocence. And you never ever have to let anyone else tell your story for you. Because here's the truth that took me 34 years to learn. The people who matter will see your worth without you having to prove it. The people who love you will celebrate your victories without you having to earn their approval. And the people who are meant to be in your life will never make you feel like you have to justify your existence. Everyone else is just background noise. So if you're carrying crayons in your pocket, if you're juggling bedtime stories and overtime shifts, if you're building a life that doesn't look like anyone else's, but is exactly what your family needs, I want you to know something. You're not the joke. You're not the charity case. You're not the cautionary tale. You're the hero of your own story. And that story is just getting started. What do you think about Alex's choice to walk away? Have you ever been in a situation where someone finally stood up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, hit that subscribe button for more real-life drama that proves sometimes the quiet heroes are the strongest ones of all.